Those aboard the Trump train had elected a president who declared, "I alone can fix it," and they took him at his word. He would provide great health care at a fraction of the cost. He would be the greatest jobs president that God ever created, by bringing back dying industries like coal mining and manufacturing. He would rebuild the U.S. military and take care of veterans. His big, beautiful wall along the border would halt illegal immigration, and Syrian refugees would no longer be allowed to enter the country. Those who had opposed Trump the candidate were horrified at the prospect of him taking office. To them, Trump had campaigned on a dystopian vision of America, and his promises to crack down on immigration, reverse Obama-era policies and pursue an isolated America First agenda were more like threats. They predicted the possibility of nuclear war, a prospect Trump has done little to ward off by provoking the volatile leader of North Korea. Of the two opposing visions of Trump's presidency, neither has been fully borne out by events. It was probably unrealistic to expect him to repeal and replace Obamacare on day one of his administration, but we're now up to day 291 and counting. His promise to push for a constitutional amendment setting term limits for members of Congress seems to have fallen through the cracks, along with getting rid of gun-free zones near schools. Tax cuts and infrastructure spending, signature initiatives during the campaign, are, respectively, a work in progress and a can in the process of being kicked down the road. One of Trump's signature campaign promises was quality health care for every citizen at a reduced cost. This, he claimed repeatedly, would be accomplished by repealing and replacing the Affordable Care Act, Obama's signature health care legislation. Although Trump and many congressional Republicans campaigned at least in part on a repeal and replace platform, the effort has been shelved after a series of defeats. A House bill was pulled by Speaker Paul Ryan, RWISC, in March because it lacked support. In May, the House passed a bill, and Trump hosted a premature celebration in the White House Rose Garden. However, the Senate rejected it and opted to write their own version instead. In July, Republican Senators Susan Collins, John McCain, and Lisa Murkowski sank the latest effort, and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said it was time to move on to other parts of the GOP agenda. Senators Lindsey Graham and Bill Cassidy, sensing one last opportunity, introduced their repeal bill in September, but a vote was never held after it failed to garner the necessary support. In May, Trump abruptly fired FBI Director James Comey, who had become a bogeyman for the Democrats for his public updates on the investigation into Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server during her tenure as Secretary of State. Trump originally cited a Justice Department memo criticizing Comey's handling of the investigation as the reason for his dismissal, but he later admitted he had already decided to fire Comey and hinted in an interview with NBC News this Russia thing with Trump and Russia influenced his decision. The team around Trump in the White House today is markedly different than the one with which he began his term in January. National Security Advisor Mike Flynn resigned after just 3 weeks, following reports that he had discussed U.S. sanctions with the Russian ambassador and lied about those interactions to the vice president. Other high-profile White House exits included the departures of Deputy Chief of Staff Katie Walsh, Communications Director Mike Dubka, Press Secretary Sean Spicer, Assistant Press Secretary Michael Short, Chief of Staff Reince Priebus, Communications Director Anthony Scaramucci, Chief Strategist Steve Bannon, and Deputy Assistant to the President Sebastian Gorka. Health and Human Services Secretary Tom Price resigned under fire after reporting by Politico revealed he had spent over $1 million in taxpayer money on chartered planes. Trump also pulled the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Agreement, a 2015 deal that established voluntarily goals for countries to curb harmful emissions. When Trump announced the U.S.'s withdrawal, Nicaragua and Syria were the only countries in the world not part of the agreement. Both have since signed on, leaving the United States the only non-member. The Trump agenda has been largely stalled in Congress, with no health care, infrastructure, or tax reform bills passed, and he has turned to executive action to realize some of his other priorities. Most notably, Trump has attempted to implement 3 versions of his travel ban, which barred Syrian refugees and citizens from several majority Muslim countries from entering the U.S. After a court ruling struck down the first iteration, Trump signed what he called a watered-down, politically correct version that would last 90 days. After that second version expired, another guidance was set to take its place that would have banned travelers from Syria, Libya, Iran, Yemen, Chad, Somalia, North Korea, and Venezuela. A federal district court judge in Hawaii largely stayed the order, leaving in place the restrictions on travel from North Korea and Venezuela. Trump ran in part on his business acumen and his understanding of the financial world, and indeed the stock market has risen and the unemployment rate has fallen since he took office. The 20% rally in the S&P 500 and the 30% rise in the Dow have sent markets to record highs, and the president plainly said recently, "The reason the U.S. stock market has been so successful is because of me." Similarly, unemployment is down to 4.1%, although Trump previously preached skepticism of jobs numbers before they could be credited to him.